Okay, I'm going to jump right into this because we're going to be looking at this passage of the woman at the well today, and the passage is long. It's John 4, verses 5 through 42. That's about 650 words, maybe 700. So what I've done is, instead of read the whole thing, I've adapted it, okay? And I'm going to give you an adapted version, so we're not here all day. And are you okay with that? I'm going to do it an adapted version. So here we go. Jesus had to pass through Samaria. He came to a Samaritan village called Sychar, and Jacob's well was there. And Jesus, tired from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw water. And Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? And the woman said to him, you are a Jewish man, and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you talking to me? And Jesus answered, if you knew the gift of God, who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Later he said to her, go call your husband and come back. Well, I have no husband, she replied. And Jesus said to her, you're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is that you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true. And the woman said, sir, I can see that you are a prophet. I know that the Messiah is coming. And then Jesus declared, I am he. Just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. And then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? And many of the Samaritans believed because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did, she said. And then they urged Jesus to stay with him, and he stayed 2 more days. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. I wonder if we could just take just a breather, take a deep breath. You can close your eyes or not, open them, keep them open, but just take a breath, and as you breathe in, maybe that breath is a reminder of how the Spirit gives living water to your thirsty heart. And just breathe in that living water, and then breathe out that grace that gives you that living water to those around you. Now, Lord, may the words of my mouth and all the meditations of all of our hearts gathered in this place today be acceptable in your sight. You are our rock and our Redeemer. And everybody said, amen. So as you may know, most of you know, or maybe you don't know, that we're in the middle of this Lenten series called Something Has to Give. We're looking at 6 stories that in the Gospels that we're invited to release. And release so something freer can be born. And so today I want to suggest another story. The story that says, I am abandoned in my past. And I want to begin with this. I got a call one afternoon, and the voice the voice on the other end just said, yo, Greg, you told me to call when I got out. Well, I'm out. And it took me a minute to recognize his voice, but it was a young man named Darian. And I'd gotten to know Darian when he was locked up in maximum security prison. And I had told him to call me when he got out. I even gave him my number. And he kept my number, and he called. He called when he got out. I told him we could get together, we could grab some lunch, and I could take him to Walmart and get him some clothes and that kind of thing, help him get ready for a new job that he had lined up. Darian grew up in a neighborhood marked by extreme poverty, gang violence, and crime. And the fact is, he did not know that a bigger world existed. That was his world. Within just a few blocks, that was his world. He didn't know that there was one that had safety in it. He didn't even understand that there would be a world with opportunity, or even, for that matter, enough to eat. He was 10 years old when he saw his first murder. 10 years old. A drive-by bullet came through the passenger window of the car he was riding in and killed the young man sitting next to him. And the next day, the very next day, a gang member in the neighborhood handed him a gun and told him, use this to protect yourself and your homies. Kill or be killed. I mentioned that he was 10, didn't I? 10 years old. By 14, he was arrested for armed robbery, and he was certified as an adult, tried as an adult, and sent to prison. And for a very, very long time, Darian did what he had always done, fight to survive. Hurt them before they hurt you, he was told, and so he did. He fought, he fought, he fought, he fought all the time. In prison. Until one day, something happened that changed him. We were sitting on the tailgate of my truck in the Walmart parking lot, eating cheeseburgers and tossing fries to the pigeons there in the parking lot, when I asked him what changed. Because this humble and friendly Darian that I had gotten to know did not resemble the angry Darian from back then. So I had to ask. I said, well, what changed? And he told me about something that happened while he was locked up. After a fight, another fight, the guards threw him in solitary confinement for 2 weeks. Ad seg. And when he got out, they told Darian that he had a visitor, his 11-year-old niece. And they sat across from each other with the glass between them. And she just looked at him for a while through the glass, the way children sometimes look at adults when they're trying to understand something that doesn't make sense. And then she asked a question that it just melted him. Hey, Darian, why are you in a cage? Hey, Darian, why are you in a cage? And then he told me, he said, I don't know, man, something about seeing her face, looking at me the way she was looking at me, it woke me up. And then he said something that stayed with me ever since he told me. He said, she didn't want to see me in a cage. And that made me not want to see myself in a cage. And that changed everything. You know, some cages are made of steel. Some cages are, I guess, made by our own choices. Some cages are made by what happened to us that we didn't have any choice in the matter. But I think sooner or later, every cage becomes a story that we start believing about ourselves. And sometimes the first step toward freedom is deciding that we do not have to carry that particular story anymore. Which brings us to this well at noon in Samaria. So Jesus is traveling, right, from Judea back to Galilee, and John tells us that he had to go through Samaria. Well, he didn't really have to go through Samaria. A detour was available, and many Jewish folks traveled that detour. They crossed the Jordan, they traveled north and on the other side and crossed back later, adding miles and sometimes even days to their journey just to avoid going through Samaria. But Jesus doesn't take that detour. John says he had to go through Samaria. And I suppose he had to go because, at least in my imagination, there was only one way that divine love was going to move him. And that was not around Samaria, but through it. And by midday, he arrives at a village called Sychar, and Jacob's well is there. The same well that had been drawing water for generations and generations. And Jesus is tired from the journey. He sits down beside this well. It's noon, high noon. The sun is directly overhead. The sun is bright. It is relentless. It is beaming down. It is this kind of light that exposes everything. There's no shadows at this time of day. All the streets are quiet, and people stay inside. Because this is not the hour you choose if you want company. This is the hour you choose if you don't want to be seen by anyone. High noon. And that's when she arrives. A woman appears on the path leading to the well, and she has this water jar, I guess, balanced on her hip. And she is alone. And everyone knows that respectable women, they didn't come to the well at noon. The respectable women, they came in the cool of the morning when the village, where they all gathered together. Because the well was more than just a place of water. It was where they shared their news, or maybe they gossiped about things, right? It's where they laughed together, and it's where community happened, at that well. But she comes at noon. Alone. Not with the others. And she's a Samaritan, right? Centuries of hostility stand between her and the Jewish man who is there resting. She's a woman, which means this traveling rabbi should not even be talking to her in the first place. And then there's this part of the story that everyone in the village seems to know. Everyone's been talking about 5 husbands. And the man she lives with is not her husband. So look, whatever the backstory, abandonment, death, divorce, just simply survival, the result is the same. She is alone. No community. She is alone at noon. So look, imagine her surprise when this stranger sitting beside the well looks up and asks her for a drink. And if that wasn't surprising enough, the conversation that follows becomes even more personal with this stranger. And at one point, Jesus says to her, "Go call your husband." And she says, "I have no husband." And Jesus says, "You're right, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with is not your husband." Now, for centuries, commentators, people have assumed that this woman's story was about some kind of moral failure. But the truth is, we don't know that. That's not what the text says. In that culture, women could be widowed, they could be abandoned, they could be divorced for any number of reasons that were completely outside of their control. They could be passed from one household to another, just simply trying to survive. Which means, I think, that the deeper truth of the story might not be scandal at all. But it could be more like sorrow. Loss. Rejection. A long history of relationships that didn't last. And somewhere along the way, that story began forming in her. A story that says, this is who you are, and this is all you'll ever be. This is where you belong. This is where you got stuck, and you're not getting out. And there's this moment that matters, I think. Jesus looks at her. And he sees her. Past every defense that she has built up, and he tells her the truth about her life. The whole truth. And he does not walk away. When the truth is revealed, he doesn't pull away. There's no condemnation in his voice. There's no shaming. There's no lecture. There is just this truth that is spoken with love, and there is a presence. The conversation shifts. She begins to sense there is more going on here than she first realizes, and at one point she says, I know the Messiah is coming, and when he comes, he'll explain everything. And in this moment, Jesus speaks words that he rarely speaks in the Gospels. He says, I am he. And then something changes in her. This woman who came to the well hoping not to be seen has just had the deepest truth of her life named. And she has not been rejected. And suddenly the story she thought defined her, the story of her past she thought defined her, is no longer the story being told. She leaves her water jug beside the well and runs back to the village. Which is interesting because the jar is the very reason she came to the well in the first place. And maybe now she has something else to carry, so she leaves that jar. She goes to town telling anyone who will listen, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. And could this be the Messiah? And the people began coming out of the village toward the well, because this woman who once came to the well at noon, isolated from a community, is now the one inviting her community to come and see. There's a lot going on there. Something changes in that moment at the well. It's not because her past disappears. Jesus doesn't erase her past. He doesn't pretend that the wounds of her past never happened. But he refuses to let her past be the final word about her life. Amazing. And somewhere along the way, this story begins, I think, at least for me, to feel a little familiar. Because the deeper cage that many of us know is not made of prison walls or iron bars, but more like this residue of a quiet story that somewhere in our past, we were left alone there. Some of us have moments in our past where something happened where actually we felt alone there ever since it happened. Sometimes it's abandonment, right? In the most literal sense. A parent who left, a marriage that failed, a relationship that ended in ways we never expected. Sometimes there's maybe even a more silent, almost powerful sense of abandonment, that a betrayal that changed the way you trust people, or a family system where love was always felt conditional. And over time, a story begins to form in us. This is just who I am. This is how my life turned out. This is the part of my story that will always define me. That's the cage. Not the past itself, right? But the belief that we are abandoned there. That whatever happened back then still gets to write the rest of the story. But here's the thing, the gospel, at least as far as I can tell, tells a different story. It's a different story. Jesus steps into the places that we thought we carry alone. And he sees us, including the parts of our story that we would rather hide. And he does not walk away. He stays. He steps directly into the place that shame tells us we are alone, and he refuses to leave us trapped there. That's just amazing to me. So maybe that's the good news that some of us need to hear today. Maybe. Because somewhere in our lives, there may still be a place where we're living by a story that says we're stuck. Where the past can still feel like a cage that we have not quite escaped. And so maybe the question that the story leaves us with today is, what story about myself am I tired of carrying? What is that story? There's that small detail, right, in the story where the woman leaves, goes back to the village, and she leaves that water jug behind, right? And the very thing she came carrying, she leaves at the well, because every encounter with Jesus asks something of us. Not something to add to our lives, but something to release. And maybe that's what began to happen for Darian, too. She didn't want to see me in a cage. And that made me not want to see myself in a cage either. Someone looked at him with love, saw him differently, and suddenly he realized he didn't have to stay in that cage. And I think that's what God's love does for us too. And that's the gospel message. So maybe for us this Lent, something has to give. So something freer can be born. And maybe it's the story that says, I am abandoned in my past. Maybe that's the story that has to give. The story that says, what happened back then still gets to define my life. Because it does not. And maybe today is the day that we have the opportunity to leave that story at the well.